Hello everyone, Stepan here. I'll continue my series on the Sicilian Defense with the dragon variation, which is probably one of the most popular variations in all of chess and probably one of the most fun openings. And I have promised to record this video a long time ago now, actually more than a month or 2 months ago, and I just couldn't catch up to it, and now I finally found some time. It's going to be a two-part video, because Sicilian Dragon is such a vast opening and there's a huge amount of theory, and the variations are actually quite different. And in the first part, this video, I'm going to cover only the bishop e3 lines, which are commonly known as the Yugoslav Attack, and it's more of a setup, pawn setup and piece setup than a variation, but the positions with bishop to e3 on move 6 in the Dragon are usually referred to as the Yugoslav Attack. In the second part, we are going to go over the classical lines with bishop to e2, the f4 lines, the g3 fianchetto lines, and the bishop to c4 lines. So we are going to go over 4 different moves on move 6 in part 2. And all of those moves probably don't have as much theory as this one move, bishop e3. And I think if you play the Dragon with black, you're going to face the bishop e3 lines much more often than any other. The Dragon was, well, it was a popular opening in the 19th century even. It was played by Henry Bird, Henry Paulsen, and Pillsbury and other great players of the past. And the Russian, he was an astronomer, I believe, Chotimirsky, coined the term the Dragon Sicilian, or at least he claims to have done so, because the constellation of the stars called the Draco resembles the pawn structure that black has with g6 and d6. So that's about the history of the opening. So one of the sharpest openings in all of chess, and probably one of the best ways for black to fight for an advantage against e4 players, and definitely an opening which requires a lot of tactical skill and a lot of theoretical knowledge as well. So let's get into it. e4. c5, of course, the Sicilian Defense. And by the way, if you lack knowledge in the basics of the Sicilian Defense, I would advise you to watch the introductory video I've made on the opening theory and the main ideas for both sides. I will link it in the description below. So c5, knight to f3, the open Sicilian, d6, and now d4. White opens up the center, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. Now there are ways to defend it without knight to c3, and I have covered the prince variation, for example, with f3, but knight to c3 is the most common reply. And here in this position, black gets to choose the variation. I have already covered the Najdorf variation, which is pawn to a6, which is probably the most popular variation of the Sicilian. And today we are going to go over g6, the Dragon variation. This is where the opening starts. After g6, black has said that he wants to play the Dragon. Now this is the star constellation. This pawn structure is supposed to resemble the Draco. You can Google an image online. I'm not sure it does, but still. And today we are going to go over only one move, and that's bishop to e3. Now this move, the Yugoslav Attack, actually creates an immediate threat for black, and once you see this move, you know what white is planning to do, and that's probably the best part. The hard part is that it's really hard to answer this for black, because with this move, white is preparing to do one simple thing: bring his queen to d2, castle long, play f3 to solidify his pawn structure, and just push his kingside pawns to play g4, h4, h5, g5, open up the position and checkmate the black king. Now since black had already played the move c5 and exchanged his flank pawn, his flank c pawn, it's really hard to castle queenside, and black really is never going to castle queenside. So white pretty much already knows where the black king is going. The black king is going to g8, and the bishop is, of course, going to g7. That's the point of the move g6. You are trying to fianchetto your bishop and put pressure along this long diagonal. Now, on the other hand, when white has played the move bishop to e3, black can be pretty much sure that white is going to castle long. So this this opening, the Yugoslav Attack in the dragon, is most often going to result in an opposite side's castling position, which is going to be extremely sharp, and one move could decide the whole game. One thing you have to remember if you want to play e4 with white, and you're going to face the Sicilian at some point, or if you want to play the dragon with black, is that you just can't waste any time. The good thing is that it's a pretty well trodden opening, and that there's a lot of theory and a lot of games, very instructive games, so you can basically remember the first 10 or 15 moves just to make sure that you don't go wrong. But after that, the bad thing is that you can't really afford a single mistake. If you waste a move, if you give your opponent one tempo or several tempi, which would be worse, then you are most probably going to be in serious trouble. So now let's continue. So white plays bishop to e3. One thing you have to do is castle and play bishop to g7 with black, so that's what you are going to do, bishop to g7. White can, white basically only has one move here. White could try queen to d2, but playing f3 is much safer, so solidifying his pawn structure. And not only that, not only defending the e4 pawn, but preparing the move g4 without sacrificing the pawn, because the queen is going to go to d2, so it's not going to support the g4 square anymore. So f3, the move f3 is double-purposed, and black now castles. This is his main idea. He wants to fianchetto his bishop, castle his king, and then start an attack of his own. Now we already said what white is planning to do. While white is trying to push his kingside pawns and start an attack on the castled king, black has to do the same thing on the other side of the board. So black's plan is most often going to be to play b5, b4, open up the position, and try to attack white. He could prepare that with the move a6 and, let's say, the move queen to b8, but there are some positions in which black will, in order to gain time, even offer a pawn sacrifice, but we are going to get to that. So a very sharp opening. After black castles, white will continue with queen to d2, and black can, instead of castling here, black could play knight to c6, but that will transpose to the same positions, because after queen to d2 now black is going to castle here, so it's the same thing. So f3 castles, queen to d2, knight to c6. And this is what you are going to see in probably 99% of all of your Sicilian Dragon games with Yugoslav Attack, bishop to e3. All of these moves are almost forced, and they just have to be played. And this position is where white can choose between two completely different options. Here, white has a choice. He can either castle or play bishop to c4. Now, if white plays bishop to c4, that's firstly developing the bishop. Secondly, it's preventing the move d5. It's putting another defender, this bishop, when it's on this diagonal, it's preventing d5. So the move bishop to c4 actually prevents a pawn break for black. If white should, on the other hand, castle, then the move d5 is on the table for black, and black could choose to break in the center. So let's go over that. Now, bishop to c4 on move 9 for white is considered to be the main line, and it's probably the best move, because restricting your opponent's options is, the best way to approach a game of chess. And if you try to look at what your opponent can do, and if you prevent that in advance, that you are most likely going to win the game. So bishop to c4 is a prophylactic move which not only develops the piece but prevents d5. However, after knight to c6, castling isn't a bad move for white. The engines will always give white a slight edge in the dragon, no matter what white does, except if he blunders something. But white has more space, and black is cramped on the first three ranks, so the engines sort of give us a subjective remark on the position, and it's not really true what they say. But as in the King's Indian and in some other closed openings, black is always going to be worse according to the engines, but that's not true. So as I said, the move bishop to c4 is designed to prevent the d5 break. After white castles, which is just a different move order, if black doesn't react, white is going to play bishop to c4 on the next move, but black can react immediately and play d5. And I think the move d5 should be played. Remember this if you play this position with the black pieces. If your opponent doesn't play bishop to c4, you most probably have time to play the move d5. Before playing knight to c6 or castling, it's risky because you haven't developed your pieces yet, but in this position it's actually perfect. And white only has one way to react, and this will actually relinquish white of his central control and, well, dampen his attacking pressure somewhat. So e takes d5, knight takes d5. Now white's best try in this position is to play knight takes c6, b takes c6, knight takes d5, c takes d5, queen takes d5. So now if you count the material, white has given up, black has given up a pawn. Black has 5 pawns, white has 6. This, however, means absolutely nothing because black has more than enough compensation for that. So now in this position, you can see that black's bishop pair is much more active than white's bishop pair. Firstly, this dark squared bishop is already perfectly placed. The light squared bishop stands ready to gain a tempo on the queen if the queen doesn't move, and it could also go to the f5 square. So you can see that this is a fairly aggressive setup for black, and I would always rather have black in this position regardless of having lost a pawn. Now there's an obvious threat in this position, and that's queen takes rook. So the queen is threatening to take the rook on a8, and black isn't going to do anything about that. Now the best move for black in this position is to move queen to c7. Now queen to c7 is a fairly aggressive move, and if black gives up a rook like this, if white takes the rook on a8, then the move bishop to f5 actually attacks the queen, which is now attacked by the rook, and threatens checkmate in 1. So let's check out both options. Now if white doesn't take the rook, this is a very popular and very well-known drawing line, and there have been several games from this position in which the players just drew. So let's go over that. So the move is queen to c5, trying to exchange the queens. Now if black accepts the queen sacrifice, then he is of course just worse. You can't checkmate with the two bishops and the rook because white still has enough defenders. So black is basically forced to decline a trade, and he does that by playing bishop to b7, of course now attacking the b2 pawn, and if white blunders it, then the game is lost. So now queen to b5, once again trying to exchange, and the players will most commonly repeat the moves here. Of course, from this position, white could play queen to a3. That has been played before if he wants to avoid the draw, but black is still considered to have equality at least. And once again, I would always rather have black in this position. So this move, after knight to c6, the move castles, could lead black into a very good attacking setup in which white is basically forced to accept a draw if he doesn't make a mistake earlier. So I think black should definitely go for that. So remember that if after knight to c6 your opponent doesn't play bishop to c4, strike in the center with d5. So d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes c6, b takes c6. Of course white has to take the pawn here, takes, queen takes. Of course don't exchange the queens, give up your rook isn't threatened. Don't do something stupid like bishop to e6 and allow a queen trade. Just be brave, play queen to c7. Well, okay, let's see what happens if white should take the rook. So in this position we just went over queen to c5, which is, well, the best move. If white takes, queen takes a8, then of course bishop to f5, threatening a mate in 1, threatening to take the queen, and white has no way to prevent his queen being captured, so the best move is of course to take another rook. So queen takes f8 check, king takes f8, and now rook to d2 defending. And in this position white has a pawn and 2 rooks for the queen, but the position is just equal. This is, by the way, also considered to be a draw because engines think everything is a draw, but in this position either side could win, and I think this is a fairly aggressive way for black to play either way, regardless of what white does after queen to c7. So just remember that you basically don't have to defend your rook. So if queen takes, bishop f5, and white is forced to give up the queen. So okay, queen to d2, knight to c6, castles, we just went over that. If you play this position with white, I would just advise you to play bishop to c4 instead of castles, just not to give black the option of playing d5. So here is, if bishop to c4, d5 is just not an option because white has just brought another defender in the game and you can't gain anything by doing that. So in this position, d5 doesn't work. Black just has to develop. Black just has to continue the development. Bishop to d7, now preparing to even capture on c6 if white should take. And here white should castle, which is now a completely different story because d5 doesn't work once again. Now instead of castling, white could consider two more moves. One of them is h4, which is an aggressive idea, which you are going to go for later on, but I think castling is more sensible. You want to bring your king to safety and then put it on b1 and then push your pawns. If white plays h4 here, black should continue with rook to c8 and after bishop to b3, because now this bishop was loose and the knight was threatening a lot of discoveries. Black should continue with h5, just closing down the position. And here if white continues with g4, just allow him to take, and you can play a6 and b5. You can take the knight and play. You can play knight to e5 and try to exchange your knight for this bishop. But basically, if you allow this position and white takes, just recapture with the knight to keep the lines closed. And I think this position is okay for black. So the move h4 on move 10 after bishop to d7 isn't really such a strong threat, I believe, and you shouldn't fear that with black. Another option instead of the main line with castles is knight takes c6 for white, and you shouldn't take with the bishop. You should open up the b file. So after b takes c6, you're threatening basically to put your rook on b8 and put pressure immediately. And in this position, if you play this with white, here you should castle kingside because this is now just too unsafe. So if your opponent captures, if you are playing this position with the black pieces, knight takes c6, just take with the b pawn, and this is basically forcing white to castle short, which is a concession because white has played f3, and white would basically like to have his pawn back on f2 because his position would be safer. So these are just two sidelines. Let's go back to the main position. After bishop to d7, castles long is by far the most popular move, and this is going to be played in almost any game. Now, white has finished his attacking setup, and this is called the Yugoslav Attack setup for white, and it's characterized by the king being castled long on the queen side, the queen on d2, bishop on e3, knights on d4 and c3, the bishop on c4, and the rooks on d1 and h1. And this is probably, you could say this is the end of the opening phase on move 10. So now white has two ideas. Firstly, he wants to put his king on b1, and secondly, he wants to create a pawn avalanche on the king side and play h4 or g4 depending on what black does. More commonly g4 will be played. So this is what white is doing. Black, on the other hand, has to decide what to do. Now the most sensible thing is to put pressure on white's position immediately, and the first move you could make is rook to c8, which is the most popular line. Rook to c8. Now, of course, this bishop is once again loose. So if you imagined knight takes d4, queen takes d4 to defend the bishop, let's say knight to g4, just saying, attacking the queen, and white is already in a lot of trouble. So white's move is bishop to b3. And this is similar to the Fischer-Sozin attack in the Knight of Defense, where white just defends his bishop in advance and moves it out of harm's way. Now, here is the first move in which at which black gets to deviate, and there are two really important lines from this position on. The main line is knight to e5, and this is a common idea in many variations of the Sicilian, especially in the Dragon. And the point behind this move is that you want to play knight to c4, grabbing the bishop pair. You can either take this bishop because it basically has nowhere to go. If it goes here, then you're going to double the knight and the bishop. So black will most commonly gain the b3 bishop, which has wasted 2 tempi, bishop to c4, bishop to b3. So knight to e5 is one line. The other line after bishop to b3 is knight takes d4. This is a sideline, so we are going to go over that first. And this is a very fun way to play, and I think I would choose to play this if I played the Dragon in tournament games. I've only been playing it in Blitz. But I've started studying the opening very much in depth, and I like this variation because I think most players with white aren't really used to this. Most are expecting knight to e5, but this is a very sharp idea. Now, as I said, in many positions, or in all of them, black will want to play the move b5. Now, to play b5, you want to move your knight out of the way so the bishop is defending. And if you eliminate the defender, and play b5 immediately, you will notice that white's two defenders become one, and you have cleared the way for your bishop to defend the b5 pawn in one move. So this is actually a very sensible idea. So instead of playing knight to e5, you can try knight takes d4, and after bishop takes d4 you can play b5 immediately. And this is a rare case in the Dragon that black had started his attack before white. So I think this is a great idea, and the engines will once again say that white holds a slight edge, but that's to be ignored. White now has to react quickly. As I said, there is no time for either side to be playing empty moves and to not do anything. So white will continue with h4, a5, preparing to play either a4 or b4. Now h5, a4, a very sharp opening, and now bishop takes f6. This is an intermezzo move which white could interpose. You are going to take with the e pawn, of course, trying to bring more defenders to your king. So e takes f6, bishop to d5 defending, and now f5. You want to open up your bishop to your own advantage, and you want to put pressure on black's position, on white's position. Now, these pieces are actually very well placed, and I think black has a lot of attacking chances in this line. And if I turned on the engine, it would completely disagree. I think you can see the evaluation bar on the right side of the board. So this is let's say slightly better for white, and it goes from slightly better when it goes in depth to +1 and then to +0.5. So the engine doesn't really know what to do with this position, but if you let it run for a long while, then it's going to say it's almost equal, so no worries. And once again, I don't think you should listen to the engine in the Dragon Sicilian, because it's not objective. After f5, white's common response is h takes g6. Now h takes, you can't take with the f pawn, of course, it's pinned. E takes f5, and now this is where you have to be brave if you play the black pieces. Never capture, of course, on f5 in this position. You have to play faster, so play b4, attacking the knight. F takes g6, and white is going to give up some material for an attack, so b takes c3. But now g takes f7 check, rook takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, king takes, and now b takes c3. And here in this position you can see that black has two bishops, a rook and a queen, and 5 pawns. I'm sorry, 2 pawns, and white has 5 pawns, 2 rooks, and the queen. So the material is, well, let's count. Okay, so 9, 14, 20, 22, 10, 19, and 3 are 24, so white is material up. But I think it's actually easier to play for black, because black has a lot more threats, and the bishop pair could be deadly in this position. And of course, black can immediately capture a pawn, so you can play rook takes c3 here, which is the main move. And this is actually still theory. We still haven't gone out of the opening book. This position has been played, so I think you should remember this well. And I think this could be a great surprise weapon for players with black, and a great deviation to surprise white. So just remember that after the move bishop to b3, so rook c8, bishop to b3, you don't have to play knight to e5, which is the main move. You can play knight takes d4, and this position is, well, it creates a forcing variation which doesn't give white a free hand on the king side, and if white doesn't attack, this variation which I have just shown you is the best way for white to play, but white could go badly wrong before that. So bishop takes d4, b5, h4. If white doesn't start a counterattack, then he's just worse. a5, h5, a4, bishop takes. If white doesn't play bishop takes here, then of course any move, let's say bishop to d5 now, could be responded with knight takes d5, so this isn't smart, so white has to get rid of the defender first. So bishop takes, e takes, bishop d5, f5, and now, well, the resulting position, as I said, is slightly better for white according to the engines, but I think it's just great for black. Okay, bishop to b3. Let's get back to the main line. As I said, the main line, the idea in the main line is knight to e5, knight to c4, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. You want to eliminate the bishop pair for white and start an attack. So now knight to e5, king to b1. White will always play king to b1 in these positions, because he wants to get his king out of the c file, which is already semi-open, and the rook is already on c8. So now knight to c4. Of course, white can't afford to move the queen and lose the dark squared bishop, because one of white's main ideas is to play bishop to h6 and eliminate the key defender in black's position. So now bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. And this is where the problems start for black. This is the main line. This has been played many times in Grandmaster games, and this is a very well-known position. And this is basically a point at which white gets to start his attack before black does. So now g4. And you can already see that, well, black is going to be in trouble before white is, and the engines actually allow white in this position. So one idea, the main move in this position is for black to try and give up a pawn. Now b3. Here, if white captures, black has actually equalized. Knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, queen to b8 gives black an equal position or even more, because now after knight to d4, rook fc8, rook c1, d5, g5, knight to e8, black has a lot of attacking pieces staring at the white king, and even though he has given up a pawn, that doesn't mean anything. So white is best advised not to take the b5 pawn. So after g4, b5, white can't take. White's best move is b3, chasing the rook away. And now after b3, rook to c8. And, well, white still really shouldn't take. Once again, the same variation applies. So knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, let's say, rook to b8 in this position, or even a6 could work, just chasing the knight away and trying to start an attack of his own. The white king is too exposed, and this structure doesn't really offer any defense for the white king, and the move h5, h4 is coming, so white is in trouble. So once again, white shouldn't really take. In this position, several moves can be played. The most often played move is actually knight takes b5, but I just don't think it should be played. According to the engines, let me turn this on, it's still knight takes b5, but it's a fairly scary move to make, and even though the engines give white an edge, I think it shouldn't be played. Well, I think the best move is g5 in this position. After g5, black can respond with b4, but you get to play g takes f6, and now let's say b takes c3 attacking the queen. You can play f takes c7 attacking black's queen, and now queen takes c7, and queen to d3 could be played. And well, I think this is better for white, but still, yeah. According to the engines, after rook to c8, knight d takes b5, and now queen to a5 should be played. Using the fact that you haven't exchanged the knights yet. So if you take bishop takes b5, then knight takes b5, your queen doesn't have the a5 square. This is supposed to be the best variation, and white should respond with the move a4. This is, by the way, still theory. There have been more than 50 games from this position on, and black should continue with the move a6, and now knight to d5. So yeah, I think this is tough for weaker players to play, and okay, let me just show you what happens here. Of course, you can't take the knight because your queen is hanging. You have to move your queen around. The move knight to d5 is just threatening to take your knight here. It's taking away key squares for your queen, so your queen has to go either go back or exchange. So now after queen takes d2, knight takes e7 check, and I'm sorry. Knight takes e7 check and king to h8. I think white is just much better, and I think black doesn't have that many attacking ideas as white does. So I think this position is just better for white. If you ask the engines what they think, it's more than +1, but still it's theory, so well, you can't argue with the toughest grandmasters. The main move here is rook c to e8, yeah, as you can see. So I think this position is too wild for us mere mortals to assess, and I think you should steer clear from that. So once again, after rook to c8, if you want to enter the mainline theory, if you're playing somebody under 2300, I guess they won't know it as well as you do. You can take the pawn, but I would advise you to try something more sensible, not to open up the lines and just accept the move b4. So okay. Let's go over the opening once again. As I said, we are just going over the Yugoslav attack, so let's get to our main position with bishop to e3. Let's go over white's setup. The Yugoslav attack is bishop to e3, f3, queen to d2, castles long, and starting a pawn storm on the king side. Black has to fianchetto his bishop, castle short, put his rook on c8, bishop on d7, knight on c6, and try to pressure white on the queen side. So very double-edged opening, and I think the first thing you should do is study at least 20 or 30 grandmaster games from this position, depending on which side of this you want to play. It would be great if you played both sides, because that's probably the best way to learn. And just try to get a feel for the position and practice. One thing I would like to emphasize once again, if you are playing this position with white pieces, after knight to c6, remember that if you don't play bishop to c4 or on move 9, but you castle instead, you're giving black the option of playing d5, so that would be a very sharp line. And another thing is that after bishop to b3 in the bishop c4 main line, black could either go for knight to e5 or knight takes d4, which is almost a forcibly drawing line or just a much better attacking position for black. So try to remember that with the white pieces. Be prepared for this move as well. So okay, that's it for the first part, the Yugoslav attack in the Dragon Sicilian. In part 2, which is coming up in 2 days, we are going to go over the classical lines, the f4 lines, the fianchetto lines, and bishop to c4. So there are going to be 4 more variations in the second video. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you got something from this video on the Dragon Sicilian. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Please feel free to give any input you have or feedback. And stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye bye.